500번 읽기 도전하고 있는 테드 선생님입니다. 꾸준한 영어 테드 선생님. 자, 오늘도 영어 원서 읽기를 할 텐데 오늘은 이제 제가 읽고 있는 책을 같이 이북을 같이 보시면서 한번 감상을 해볼 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 제가 항상 이 책을 보면서 이제 책을 읽고 있는데 챕터별로 나눠읽기 하고 있기 때문에 챕터 1에 대해서 이제 오늘 여러분들이 본문 내용도 같이 보시면서 제가 읽고 있는 내용을 같이 숙지하시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 자, 챕터 1 제가 이제 읽기를 시작해 보도록 하겠습니다. The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left at home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them, as I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And the people think you are being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore or scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I wasn't talking about that first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows. The wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chitra were curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd taken out as his own. I saw that once again. He'd covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chester more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes, since it was just about time for the movie to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle, a bundle with tiny glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad!" "Take your boots off! You're soaking wet," replied his mother, somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But, Mom, what about—" "First, stop dripping on the carpet." "Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him." "You will drop him." "I will not. You will too." "Mom, Pete punched me." "I'll take him," said Mrs. Monroe. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats that she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then, all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just, "Good boy, Harold," or "Use the little box chatter at our house." Oh no. With us it's, "Hey, Harold, Dad got a raise and now we are in a higher tax bracket," or "Come sit on the bed, chatter, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative," which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor, and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer, so we think of it as a rather special household. And we are, therefore, rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had sat on something. Mr. Monroe told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat. But in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Monroes were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through these veins, and the Russian wolfhound happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell it was a note from a bereaved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Monroe and the boys would make a house for him out of an old crate and some heavy dirty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boys would make a bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Peter ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get him some milk and lettuce. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he came to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester, and the two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because deafening crashing commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby broke the rabbit house." "I didn't. I just dropped it. Peter won't let me carry it. It's too big. Toby's too little." "I'm not. You are too." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Monroe called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Cheddar turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive, but if there's any milk left, I get it." I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself. At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing the strain of being pulled in two directions at once. "Ma, Toby says he's going to keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." "Only sometimes," I thought, "when I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer." Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, at one of those late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing. And the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled around me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a cricket in my neck for days. "But he's mine," Toby said. "I found him." "You sat on him, you mean." "I found him and he's sleeping in my room." "You can keep smelling old Harold in your room and Cheddar too if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine," Pete said. Smelly old Harold. I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Monroe spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room, on that table by the window. It's a light there, and he will get lots of fresh air." "Pete's taller than I am," Toby cried. "He'll be able to see the rabbit better." "Too bad, Squirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Monroe, through clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Pete asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Monroe smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby. "He's not drinking his milk." Chester nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked. "Excuse me while I make myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we gotta name him." "Can't that wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. "No, he has to have a name right now." I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really going to call me Floppy, as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. Well, all right, sighed Mrs. Monroe. What about, oh, say, Bun Bun? Uh-oh, there she goes again, I thought. Where does she keep them? Yuck, we all said. Well then, how about the Floppy? She offered hopefully. Peter looked at his mother and smiled. You never give up, do you, Ma? Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Floppy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Monroe's ankles and purring loudly. No, Chester, not now, she said, pushing him aside. He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester? Toby asked, as he scooped him up into his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. Come on, Harold, Toby called. You've got to help with the name, too. I joined the family, and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So, this is your rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a Chester, only he's got longer ears and a shorter tail and a motor in his nose. Well, said Pete after a moment, since we found him at the movie, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater, Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby, are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named the Prince once, he replied lamely. Prince, I thought. That's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not going to let him name him, are you? That's a favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed Chester a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of the milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more argument. We'll compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we'll call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered Chester. I won't be happy until she puts down the milk. Well, guys, is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Peter looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Ma, I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to feed him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk bag in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping the frantic cat to the floor. Maybe he would like it. Chester made a beeline for Mrs. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. Oh, Chester doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today. She reached down, patted Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mr. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Pete said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement from the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby good night. Good night, Smelly Harold. Good night, Dumb Chester. I drooled on Pete's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with a great finality as she came back into the living room. And then more calmly, good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever. But Nicola, I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert. She smiled as she put her arm through his. I think Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly he turned to me. I wish they had named him Floppy. was all he said. 자, 한번 읽었습니다. 오늘은 이제 책을 보면서 읽으니까 조금 더, 네, 저는 책을 보고 읽는데, 네, 여러분들이, 사실 제 낭독만 들으면 재미가 없잖아요. 그죠? 그래서, 특단의 조치를 취했습니다. 버니큘라를, 본문을 같이 보시면서, 보는 걸로. 그래서 같이 원서를 읽는 방식으로, 하실 수 있는 분들은 같이 하시면 되게 좋겠죠? 예, 좀 전에 한 번은 제가 오랜만에 이 사운드를 들으면서 했었어요. 그래서 이제 사운드를 빼고, 예, 이제 순수하게 제가 이제 읽어보는 걸로 하겠습니다. 사운드를 자꾸 들어주는 이유는 뭐 다 아시겠지만, 영어에서 사용되어지는 리듬 감각, intonation, 그리고 어디서 강조점을 두고 어디서 강조점을 두지 않는지, 그리고 소리의 흐름이 어떤 식으로 흘러가는지를 알기 위해서 원어민들이 하는 발성을 자꾸 들어줘야만 합니다. 그죠? 그리고 물론 이제 책을 읽는 발성과 말을 하는 발성은 조금 틀립니다만, 그래도 우리가 기본적인 발성, 표준 음가로 말을 하고 있는 거기 때문에 분명히 소리를 들어주는 건 큰 도움이 됩니다. 자, 이제 Chapter 1 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. Chapter 1 The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen, and people think you are being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore or scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about that first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows. The wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chester was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd staked out as his own. I saw that once again he'd covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chester more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes, since it was just about time for the movie to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in each glare, I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle, a bundle with tiny glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad!" "Take your boots off. You are soaking wet," replied his mother, somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But, Mom, what about First, stop dripping on the carpet." "Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him." "You will drop him." "I will not. You will too." "Mom, Pete punched me." "I'll take him," said Mrs. Monroe. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats that she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then, all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. They good for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just good boy Harold or use the little box Chester at our house. Oh no. With us it's hey Harold, Dad got a razor and now we are in a higher tax bracket. Or come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative, which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Murno is a college professor and Mr. Murno is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household, and we are, therefore, rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience, already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had sat on something. Mr. Murner told him to stop making a fuss and to move to another seat. But in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Murner borrowed his flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Murner's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the mourners were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through these veins, and the Russian wolfhound happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from a bereaved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Morneau and the boys would make a house for him out of an old crate and some heavy duty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boys would make a bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get him some milk and lettuce. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he came to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester, and the two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby broke the rabbit's house." "I didn't. I just dropped it. Pete won't let me carry it. It's too big. Toby's too little." "I'm not. You're too." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Mona called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive. But if there's any milk left, I get it." I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself. At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing the strain of being pulled in two directions at once. Ma, Toby says he's gonna keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room. Only sometimes, I thought. But I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer. Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong. But it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, at one of those late night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste of chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing. And the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a crick in my neck for days. But he's mine, Toby said. I found him. You sat on him. You mean? I found him. And he's sleeping in my room. You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room, and Chester too, if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine. Smelly Old Harold? I would have bitten his ankle. But I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Murnau spoke up. I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room, on that table by the window. It's light there, and he will get lots of fresh air. Peter's taller than I am, Toby cried. He will be able to see the rabbit better. Too bad, Squirt. Okay, said Mrs. Murnau through clenched teeth. Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep. Why? Pete asked. I don't want to go to sleep. Mrs. Murnau smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. Look, Ma, said Toby. He's not drinking his milk. Chester nudged me in the ribs. Didn't I tell you? He asked. Excuse me while I make myself available. Hey, said Toby, we gotta name him. Can that wait until tomorrow? Asked Mr. Murnau. The boys shouted in unison. No, he has to have a name right now. I have to say, I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really gonna call me Plucky as Mrs. Murnau had suggested. Well, all right, sighed Mrs. Murnau. What about, say, Bun Bun? Uh-oh, there she goes again. I thought, where does she get them? Yuck, we all said. Well, then how about Fluffy? She offered hopefully. Peter looked at his mother and smiled. You never give up, do you, Ma? Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Murnau's ankles and purring loudly. No, Chester, not now, she said, pushing him aside. You want to help us name him, don't you, Chester? Toby asked. As he scooped him up into his arms, Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. Come on, Harold, Toby called. You've got to help with the name too. I joined the family and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So this is a rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a chatter, only he's got longer ears and a shorter tail and a motor in his nose. Well, said Pete, after a moment, since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater. Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about Prince? Said Mr. Murnau. Dad, said Toby. Are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named Prince once, he replied lamely. Prince, I thought, that's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not gonna let him name him, are you? Mom, you're not gonna let him name him, are you? That's favoritism, and I will be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Murnau looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. and with each please, he squeezed Chester a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, "Let's not have any more argument. We will compromise. He's a bunny and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we'll call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me." "What about me?" muttered Chester. "I won't be happy until she puts down that milk." "Well, guys, is that okay with you?" she asked. Toby and Pete looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. "Yeah, Mom, I think that name is just right." Pete shrugged. "It's okay, but I get to feed him." "Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow." "What about Chester?" Toby said, dropping the friendly cat to the floor. "Maybe he would like it." Chester made a beeline for Mrs. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. "Oh, Chester doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chester?" "You've already had your milk today." She reached down, patted Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. "Okay, bedtime," said Mr. Monroe. "Good night, Bunnicula," Toby said. "Good night, Count Bunnicula," Peter said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement from the cage. "Good night, Harold." "Good night, Chester." I licked Toby good night. "Good night, Smelly Harold." "Good night, dumb Chester." I drooled on Peter's foot. "Mom, Harold drooled on my foot." "Good night, Pete," Mrs. Monroe said with great finality as she came back into the living room, and then more calmly, "Good night, Harold." "Good night, Chester." Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. "You know, dear," Mr. Monroe said, "that was very clever. Bunnicula. I could never have thought of a name like that." "Oh, I don't know, Robert." She smiled as she put her arm through his. "I think Prince is a lovely name, too." The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the closed kitchen door, in a state of shock. Slowly, he turned to me. I wish they had named him Fluffy, was all he said. 네, 오늘은 여기까지 들어가겠습니다. 예, 평소와 달리 새로운 시도를 해봤는데요. 저한테는 되게 대단한 시도거든요. 잘 할 줄 모르는데, 자, 이렇게 지금 해봄으로써, 제가 하는 것만 들을 때는 사실 재미가 없잖아요. 근데 여러분들도 혹시 낭독이라는 걸 같이 해보고 싶다면 저와 같이 이제 내용을 보실 수 있도록 저도 한번 계속 이렇게 올려보도록 하겠습니다. 그러면 여러분들도 제 소리를 뭐 굳이 듣지 않으시더라도 또 내용을 보면서 따라 읽으실 수 있잖아요. 그래서 앞으로는 이렇게 한번 시도해 보도록 하겠습니다. 자, 오늘은 여기까지.